and the way in which, certainly in the B2B space, the way in which customers want to buy is now distinctly different, right? We keep hearing that by the time somebody in the B2B space is actually agreeing to meet with a rep, they've already done 70% of their research, they've been online, they've discounted certain providers, suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. Distinctly different kind of conversation. And in many ways, one of the phrases that I've heard used quite a lot in recent time is this notion of the job of the salesperson today is to be a sense maker.
You're listening to the Sales Today podcast, and I'm your host, Fred Copestake. On this podcast, we explore how sales professionals can develop a modern approach to winning business, the application of virtual selling techniques, how to create meaningful business relationships, and much more. Why not take our free collaborative selling scorecard to see how your sales approach suits today's environment? You'll find a link in the show notes. And welcome to the Sales Today podcast, where I'm delighted to be joined today by James Michael. Today it's going to be a bit different. We're going to turn things upside down, which is kind of relevant because James is sat in Australia and I'm sat here in the UK. And the reason I sort of say we're going to do this is that James is going to interview me more than I'm going to interview him. So we thought we'd have a bit of fun turning it around like this. So James, welcome. Here's the host mic. Good day, yeah, obvious. Here's the host mic. I suppose you want to introduce yourself then. Yeah, now you're taking over.
All right, thank you. Yeah, a bit of an odd one, and at least we are both in the same day. We're not in the same time zone, but we are in the same day. It's 6 a.m. for you. It's 5 p.m. for me, both of which are unreasonable, really, because it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, and as an Aussie, I really ought to be having a beer by now. But I'll stick to the water.
It's the things we do for our art.
The things we do. So, might just create some context for your listeners as well, just by way of a little bit of background. So I own a business at the moment called Justify Talent. I will share with the audience that I'm actually just this close to selling it. So we've got contracts which are being put together at the moment, which is exciting. The business has been around for about 8 years. And we've specifically been focused on working with typically smaller businesses here in Australia to recruit their first sales hire, right? And my background's in behavioral psychology, so I come at this thing called recruitment distinctly differently to everybody else. By way of example, I don't ask for cover letters, I don't ask for resumes, I don't even conduct interviews, as weird as all that sounds. So because I'm a little bit odd like that, of course, someone like Fred was very appealing because he's a bit odd as well, as anybody who's familiar with him will attest. Right? That's fair, isn't it, Fred?
It's absolutely fair. Yeah, I get it.
And Fred, for my audience down here, some of whom have seen you before, because you're not the first. It's not the first time you've been interviewed for an Australian audience. But for those that haven't seen you before, tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so my name's Fred Copestake. I'm founder of Brindis, which is a sales training consultancy. Over the last 25 years, I've figured I've been around the world 14 times. I've worked in 38 different countries, of which Oz isn't one, sadly, and this is what I'm trying to remedy. And I've worked with over 10,000 salespeople, which is, it's a privilege to do that. It's actually to be in front of that many people. And as well as a fun, a little bit of stress at times, but it's given me great insight into the challenges that salespeople have. And so I sort of classify those and break those down, and that's why I've written kind of the first of my books. But as I've kind of carried on my journey, I've realised that the sort of the engineering, or I think you call them the cement space, is where I do best work, because there are some unique challenges in that too. So I've kind of doubled down on really trying to make sure that what I'm doing is giving people framework solutions and ways to overcome some of the blockers that they get in their own way a little bit. And then we can have brilliant success when we do that. So, yeah, that's me.
Cool. And you're a multi-author. Tell us about your books.
Yeah, so the first one, like I said, called Selling Through Partnering Skills. So this is all about being more collaborative in the way we sell. So think like a partner. We're not trying to manipulate and bash people into submission. We want to sit alongside them to help them work out the best way that they can do stuff. Wrote that in 2020. Yeah, okay. Slight competition on the global stage of what was going on. But it's still very, very relevant. Probably that the whole pandemic thing probably made it more relevant. That came out then, and so in pandemic, yeah, I was sat with everyone else, lockdown, watched all the Netflix, got to the end of Tiger King, and thought, "I probably should be doing something a bit better with my time." And I started looking and going, "Look, the changes that I've been talking about, they're coming faster, and the changes were happening." And so that's why I wrote during lockdown, I wrote a second book, which is hybrid selling. That kind of went really well at the time. And then most recently, actually birthday today, was it? Or certainly this week, a year ago, ethical selling. Because again, looking where we're going, what buyers respond to, and what we really need to be doing if we want to make a difference. That's up with that. And shorthand for that one is about win-win-win. Yeah, a lot of people talk about win-win. Win for customer, clearly. Win for your company, but you've also got to have a win for your conscience. You've got to do stuff in a way that you can look yourself in the mirror and go, you know what I did today? I can be proud of that. Yeah, I've done that. Honesty, integrity. I'm decent. When we get all this stuff right, good stuff starts to happen. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
very
that's
cool.
probably it for a bit. Let's
All right,
concentrate on spreading the goodness of those.
indeed. Let's preach. Let's go back in time a little bit. You shave your hair so people can't tell how old you are. Obviously, people can see how old I am. When I got into selling, which is just immediately post my military career, things were very different back then in terms of how we sold versus how we sell today, or at least people want to buy today. And we'll probably talk about that seller versus buyer thing in due course. What was it like for you when how did you get into selling?
Yeah, accidentally. Classic, eh?
Yeah.
But then maybe when I go right back and I look sort of deep history, there's probably a reason why I did. But I was at university. I studied commerce and Spanish. I hadn't applied for any jobs. I went to a rugby match because my home club was playing a club in Birmingham where I was. Bumped into someone Dad was talking to. He a good chap. We had a chat. A couple of days later, Dad rang me and said, "Do you know the fellow you're talking to at the rugby club?" I could barely remember, but yeah. He said, he'd like to talk to you more because they've got a project that he thinks you'd be really useful for because of the Spanish element. And so
Right.
I actually moved in. I got offered a job to come and support a product launch in Spain. So second week of work, I'm on a business class flight to Spain. There's all these backstories. People, oh, sales used to be so hard in my day. Goes bloody brilliant. Is this what it's like? We stay in a like five-star hotel and go watch Barcelona play football. I like work. Okay, it wasn't always like this after. But yeah, that's how the introduction happened. It was kind of accidental. And that was a short-term role, but then I kind of got offered, worked in the sales team after that, then back into a business development role where I was quite young, I suppose, looking after various countries kind of through our distributors and subsidiaries and doing stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, and that was with an engineering company. That was working for the fittings division for a pneumatics company. So I
Right.
guess that's where part of the engineering thing comes from.
Yeah.
Although I'm not an engineer. I'm
Right.
fascinated by what they can do. I think it's bloody brilliant.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And I'm going to kind of park this, throw this out there, and we'll talk about this in a while because a lot of engineers say, I'm not a salesperson, right? But we'll come back to that in a tick. So interestingly, back then, certainly down here in Australia, I don't know who the luminaries were in the UK in terms of who you got your sales learning from. I know I watched a smattering of John Cleese videos. There was a lot of Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, all those sorts of people, Brian Tracy. For me, in hindsight, what sales felt like was as though it was some kind of martial art, right? And probably something akin to judo or something where you were going to manipulate people into some kind of hold where eventually they would submit and they would tap out and say, okay, I'll buy. Right. There was the trial closes and all of the different somewhat manipulative kinds of things. And we then had exhortations of every no gets you closer to a yes. It's a numbers game. All that kind of stuff, right? Was that the sort of thing you were exposed to as well?
Similar. My first training was actually consultative selling training. So that was
Right.
just coming into vogue. Or
Right.
it wasn't full on consultative, it was someone who was talking about spin.
You're
However, if you
considerably
looked at
younger
the
than me then.
and I always look at all the filters on here.
Yeah, yeah. Go on. Sorry, I
Because
enjoy it.
I'm controlling the day. No, so that'd be 95. However, yes, so that was just coming in. But if you look at the culture and you look at the way, a lot of the sales team talked, who had the best car, first thing. If you could scan the company car policy and get sort of a bit more sporty, you'd won. So yeah, that was a big focus of everyone. But then also that, oh, I did this to a customer, and the kind of that manipulation, or you've done this clever thing, this smart thing, was lauded. Yeah, that was praised. It was considered a good thing. They also, it was considered a bit of a dark art. Now, whether that was also people, probably because they didn't really know what they were doing. If I look back with hindsight now, and it was like, oh yeah, and kind of this mystique of what they did. And when the salespeople turned up in the office, there was all this sort of, bravado and, yeah, we do these things. And what do you do? Oh yeah, well, you wouldn't understand. Well, it's probably they couldn't tell us actually, but yeah, it was similar. I was still part of that era, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Fast forward to today, though, and the way in which, certainly in the B2B space, the way in which customers want to buy is now distinctly different, right? We keep hearing that by the time somebody in the B2B space is actually agreeing to meet with a rep, they've already done 70% of their research, they've been online, they've discounted certain providers, suppliers, et cetera, distinctly different kind of conversation. And in many ways, one of the phrases that I've heard used quite a lot in recent time is this notion of the job of the salesperson today is to be a sense maker. Right? Help me make
I,
sense of all this stuff that I've understood. Yeah.
I love that phrase. I use it a hell of a lot because it just makes sense. It is, and if you think about it, so back in the day, you'd rock up with your catalogue and your samples case, and that actually would be interesting. That was how a buyer
Mm.
got information. That's what the customer needed to learn. So you were a custodian of all this. Yeah, it'd be nice to me. That's not going to tell you things. And it was about telling things, including all the company history and all that sort of stuff, which probably, when you look at it, was never relevant. But now that there's so much information out there, I reckon the buyer's going to know more than the salesperson. Because, like, yeah, you know your stuff really well, but I do know about your stuff. I've seen your website and all of your competitors. So actually, I have got a good sense of the stuff that's there, and I'd just buy it if I could, but I'm not quite sure. But just telling me the stuff that I already know when I was looking anyway isn't going to help. Sit down with me and help me get clarity around what it is I'm actually trying to do. That for me just is such a better approach, and that's how to differentiate, because it's, I'll talk to you because that conversation's valuable. Talking about all the added value your company gives, I don't really care about that. You are adding value talking to me because I can see what I need to do now. Thank you. But I think we still sometimes miss that. To round out then for the Sales Today podcast, where can people get in touch with you if they wanted to sort of discuss this more, or kind of hear a bit more, the psychometric or the assessment that you mentioned? Where do they get in touch?
Yeah, probably the best place to kind of find me is going to be LinkedIn. So it's just James Michael, based in Orange in Sydney. Alternatively, hop onto the website, which is justifiedtalent.com. And yeah, you'll find my ugly mug up there on a video and some little buttons you can press to make contact.
Awesome, and we'll pop a link to that into the show
Cool.
notes as well. So brilliant.
Excellent.
Well, thanks for taking the time to sort of turn the tables and to extract some stuff. And to be fair, you've shared loads of good stuff too. So
Thank you, Matt.
yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Today podcast with me, your host, Fred Copestake. I hope you've enjoyed what you heard today. If you did, please get in touch and hit subscribe. And remember, you can take the Collaborative Selling Scorecard for free to check out how your sales approach works in today's environment. You'll find it in the show notes.